it was decisive. Mentioned before, the Australians certainly appreciated our performance in that battle. They celebrated every year, May the 8th, every year. You mentioned something about Midway. Do you want to get into that and what I think is pertinent, that it would be of interest to those who concentrate?
Absolutely.
Now, you think back, before the war started, before Pearl Harbor, the Japanese were making plans, and that taking Midway was in their plan because they intended to make all the progress they could in the first year. The first year, they knew that Admiral Yamamoto was very clear on that, very emphatic. So when they attacked Pearl Harbor, that was just the first step, okay? Now, at Pearl Harbor, that morning, we were supposed to have two carriers, aircraft carriers, on that side of North Island. Ford Island, not North Island, Ford Island, right there. Two aircraft carriers were supposed to be there. The Japanese intelligence had them moored there, and they were supposed to be there. They had good intelligence, you know, they were excellent. But anyhow, because of weather and a mechanical problem, those two carriers were not there. Now, why is that important? If they had been there, the Japs would have, they had 20 torpedo planes came in from that direction to sink those two carriers. Then they were going to bomb them and make sure that it never repaired. That was the Enterprise in Yorktown. Now, what does that have to do with Midway? If those two carriers had been there, they would not have been available for the Battle of Midway. We would have lost the Battle of Midway. We didn't have the carriers. They had 4. They would have outnumbered us, and they would have overpowered us. 2 months after they took Midway, they were going to take Pearl Harbor, Oahu, if you will. And they would have been in a position to look President Roosevelt in the eye and say, now what do you want to do, Mr. Roosevelt? Do you want to negotiate with us? You have nothing left in the Pacific. We would have lost our last port, our last base, our last center of operations in the Pacific. We would have been forced back to the West Coast to fight the Japanese from there, and that would have been a difficult situation. Thank God our president didn't have to make that decision, but we were that close. If God had not, and I know he did, bring about the mechanical problem and the weather, it would have been a different war. Any questions about that? Now, I've got some more things to say about Midway, if you want to
Sure.
get
Do
into
you have
that.
some questions too?
He covered most of the questions that I had for me.
Now, I wasn't there, but I've got some opinions, and I'm sure Cecil back there has some opinions too.
Well, in your opinion, what was the biggest turning point in the war in the Pacific?
Well, I think Midway, because we crushed them. And we were fortunate. What a lot of people don't know, and I didn't know this, except I heard it on the military channel. The Japanese, you might back me up on this, Cecil, or correct me. I wish I had a map, but the Japanese had 4 carriers that they could have used in the Battle of Midway. They were far, sort of in the direction of Alaska. Hmm?
They were up in the ocean.
They were,
They could say that's where the main landing was coming.
they could have been with those 4 carriers that attacked Midway, but they didn't. The Japanese held those back. And as a result, they lost that battle. And so they used poor judgment there. They didn't use what they could have had to bring against us. And they would have taken it. They would have taken Midway.
Do you mind if I say one thing on that?
Go ahead.
The reason they did that was because we had already capitulated in the Philippines and the Caribbean. And they thought through their Bushido code that we weren't worthy as warriors to begin with. So they were able to split their forces and try to use a ruse to get us up into Alaska. And at the same time, the main target was Midway. But they didn't know that we had theirs in the J code. And we broke it, and that's why everybody stayed down at Midway.
What part of the success at Midway do you think you can attribute to luck?
Well, you go back to the intelligence operation. That was well thought out, but when we broke their code, that was the important. It went back a long time before Midway, but that was so essential. We had broken their code, then they figured out, we determined where they were going to attack, and it was Midway. You've seen that in the movie, I'm sure.
Well, they called the location that they were putting our task forces in Point Luck. Our task forces, our carriers went out into the sea and met at Point Luck, waiting for the Japs to be found. So we were kind of pulling in other pieces of luck that we experienced, like the carriers not being at Pearl Harbor when they bombed it. The fact that we had the intelligence and the radar that the Japanese didn't, things like that.
Well, I don't think it was any different than the battles that have been fought before and after. There's always that element. Can be planned and analyzed and rehashed, and this is the way it's going to be, and it doesn't happen that way. It just happens that way. I've got something that I think you'd be interested in if you haven't ever gotten into it. The Hornet. Did you say you bored in on the Hornet and squadrons? Did you detect that there was some confusion and things didn't work out? Here's a good example. It didn't work out. That Commander Waldron, who headed the torpedo squadron, he broke away from the carrier air group and headed a different. You know about that?
Yes.
Good. That's significant.
Yes, sir.
There are a lot of. I had never heard of that situation.
You got confused with Wade McCluskey in bombing. Torpedo Wade poured in and went in and drew all the Japanese top cover down to the deck, and in the process, his entire torpedo squadron, plus the other 2 torpedo squadrons from the other ships, people don't talk about them. Only 5 aircraft came back out of 3 squadrons.
Yes.
So they were all decimated. What they did was they drew the Japanese cover down to the deck. Now, who won the Battle of Midway? Wade C. McCluskey. He is the number 1 top hero.
He's focusing on 3 people who were leaders.
Nimitz is fully credited.
Waldron, and McCluskey. Because McCluskey couldn't have done it without torpedo.
Waldron wrote a letter before he left and left his gunner on he bore in, and by chance, you know, he never got a bomb yet. He had a near miss, and he was credited by Nimitz, and everybody calls everybody as the guy who won the battle there. Because without him, it wouldn't have happened. And without Walter drawing all those Japanese heroes down to the deck, it wouldn't have happened.
That's what his premise is.
And we had another really good helper in that fight, Nagumo.
Oh,
And
yes.
his indecisiveness, he helped us tenfold.
Mhm.
But that's all, you know, that's all stuff that we know after the fact.
Right.
When Bob was there, you know, they knew nothing about the codes or anything. That was all top secret stuff.
Okay, and you're a historian?
Yeah, I'm a historian.
Okay, we want to get you on tape too, so
Okay.
keep those thoughts in your head.
The torpedo planes and dive bombers actually flew to Midway. They didn't fly back to the Hornet. That's something that surprised me too when I read it. So there's a lot to that Hornet that you can bring out that many, 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 many people do not know about.
Well, and the Doolittle rocket also flew off the Hornet.
Oh yes, oh yes,
So
yes
it played a
indeed.
significant role.
We've got some information over here. The movie Pearl Harbor, the 3-hour extravaganza. All the scenes aboard ship were carriers were shot here.
Okay? Is there anything else you'd
Yeah,
like
yeah.
to ask him before we stop the tape and let him just?
They say that Pearl Harbor was a landmark in history for your generation. For my generation, that landmark is proving to be the terrorist attack on 9/11. What advice could you give my generation who still has to deal with the fallout of the attack, of that attack over 10 years later?
To get involved. Too many of you don't know what's going on. Those your age and too many older than you have no idea what's happening in our country. That's your freedom is being taken away more and more. Believe me, it is. And I'm not talking as an old man who's over the hill and doesn't have much time left. This old man's had a lot of experience starting with the Depression, and you're also headed in that direction. But if you, those of you here, if you don't get involved and jump on these politicians who are thinking only of themselves, and they have formed a class that they're protecting one another, Democrat and Republican. And if you don't get into this mess, you're going to wonder, why didn't I, when you're saying, what am I going to do for food? I tell you, during a depression, you find out a lot of things. I found out the best cardboard to use in my shoes when my soles wore out. Couldn't afford new shoes, so we had to get cardboard. And the best cardboard I found was shoebox. Imagine that. The shoebox turned out to be the best. But you really haven't been tested. You haven't been tested. You don't know what it's like. And if you don't get into it, it's going to happen to you. So help me God, it's going to happen to you. There's no way that you can print money for year after year after year with nothing to back it up and expect things to go as they are today. Just like smoking marijuana. You know? It's all a figment of your imagination. I don't know what better advice to give you, but I assure you that if you don't, you're going to regret it.
Either of